Ever wondering where to go for your next summer vacation? What about this little place, Sihanoukville in Cambodia? A nice, relaxing, sleepy little beach town, perfect for a dip in the beautiful clear waters under the warm sun. Doesn't that sound so nice? Well, too late. It's now the human trafficking, money laundering, cyber scam hub city of Southeast Asia. If you think that's all of Cambodia's problems right now, you'd be very wrong. Modern Cambodia is the goat of being riddled with significant structural challenges everywhere. Here are just some examples. Yeah, that's quite a lot, isn't it? Wonder why the state of Cambodia turned out like this? Well, I'm no expert, but maybe, just maybe, it's the 160 plus years of exploitation of the people by the ruling class. Let's see how Cambodia got into this mess together, shall we? Cambodia started off as a joint group of merchants called Phu Nan, and later became these, Water and Land Chenla. One day, this guy named Jayavarman II became king and gave himself the humble title of Chakravartin, meaning world ruler. That's how the Khmer Empire, also known as Cambodia, started out, and things were actually going pretty well. They were big and prosperous, even building this thing called the Angkor Wat. Impressive, right? The problem? Their neighbors. We call this place mainland Southeast Asia, or Indochina. As you can see, there are 5 countries here: Myanmar, Thai, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Here's how things generally work around here. If these countries strong, these countries weak. Like this. If these countries strong, then these countries weak. Like this. In around the 17th century, these guys were very strong, meaning Cambodia was very weak, possibly the weakest it's ever been. Its kings were always threatened by rival family members, constant uprisings, drought, and plague. The neighboring country of Thai used this opportunity to grant protection to Cambodia's kings, in exchange for some lands and resources, of course. As you can tell, Cambodia's situation wasn't looking so good, with Vietnam also looking for opportunities to. We, the scent of a dying country. How gourmet. The French were probably the most experienced colonialists there were. Just look at all that work experience. In 1864, they approached the then king of Cambodia and convinced him to set up the French protectorate. The French were the masters of their craft, so while in the first 15 years they acted all passive and didn't really demand much, while in reality they were quietly gaining control over internal affairs and the military. In 1884, the French revealed their true French colors and at gunpoint forced the king to turn Cambodia into a colony. The French made sure that its control was beneficial to only the top senior Cambodian officials and the king's brother, who had his own eyes on the throne. Together, they worked together to create a wonderful utopia for everybody was happy. Kidding, of course, they made a system of oppression and exploitation where they extracted natural resources from Cambodia and overtaxed the locals. On top of this, the introduction of Western education and legal systems did offer some opportunities but was too abrupt and shallow, making it easier to appeal to radical ideologies like a 16-year-old that just found Twitter for the first time, naturally creating huge inequalities and social divisions between the people. After World War II, Cambodia sought independence under their king, Norodom Sihanouk. He presented himself as the righteous leader who never gave up to take back Cambodia from those buttery French fingers, which gained immense popularity from his people. What the people didn't realize at the time was that he had disbanded the government and the National Assembly of Cambodia before receiving independence in 1953. You see, even if he branded himself as a righteous leader, he kinda wanted to rule the country by himself. So, even when he agreed to make Cambodia a constitutional monarchy, he used sneaky tricks like voter intimidation and electoral fraud to become prime minister. Of course, when you intimidate people into voting for you, and then cheat the elections anyway, some people are going to get pretty angry. Especially the recently French educated, pumped full of the freedom of the French Revolution and the new radical ideologies of communism and anarchism. These people would merge with the leftover anti-French Vietnam-backed guerrillas into the Communist Party of Cambodia, also known as the Khmer Rouge. Sihanouk was also kind of a control freak, so he would use classic dictator military crackdowns to gain as much control from the existing elites and military officials. The problem was, he had alienated the existing elites that knew how to run the country, its industries, and the military. Naturally, Cambodia's industries failed and the country quickly ran out of money. While all this was happening, Sihanouk was busy pouring millions of dollars into directing his self-insert romance and superhero movies. If Cambodia sounds pretty screwed already, don't worry, it gets worse. Sihanouk's rule created an interesting dynamic in Cambodia. On one side, you had the right-wing military, anti-communist, US-backed Republican groups. On the other, you had the left-wing, anti-colonialist, guerrilla communist groups. It's pretty natural for right-wing groups to hate left-wing groups. But in the middle of it all, you had Sihanouk and his government, suppressing every kind of opposition against him. Each group was scrambling to increase their influence from the public, mostly with threats and propaganda. Just when you thought that things couldn't get even more worse, the Vietnam War broke out, causing mass instability across the border. Sihanouk attempted to maintain neutrality between sides, but I don't think he knew what neutral means because he allowed communist North Vietnamese troops to stay in Cambodia. This made the US of A so mad they did what they do best. No, not riding electric scooters in their malls with a milkshake, bombing villages. From 1969 to 1973, the US dropped over 500,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia, basically destroying the western half of the country. While bombing Cambodia, the US did what they did second best. No, not squishing a burger between two donuts and then eating 10 of them consequently. They backed a coup, overthrowing the existing government for a US-friendly one. In 1970, Sihanouk was overthrown in a US-backed coup led by General Lon Nol, causing an all-out civil war between Lon Nol's government and the Khmer Rouge. I'm not going to explain the specifics of the 5-year-long civil war, I'll just sum up the results for you. All farmlands destroyed, their few industries are all gone, 500,000 people dead, with 2 million displaced. Cambodia more or less looked like the next set of Mad Max, with a few trees, some burnt ruins, and a victorious red flag. Oh yeah, these guys won the war, and their leader is now the new ruler of Cambodia. His name is Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a unique specimen even for a communist dictator. He was one of the ones who got his education in France during the colonial times. Instead of enjoying the Eiffel Tower or escargots, he delved into communism, which he didn't really understand. Instead, he chose a lovely cocktail of Stalin, Mao, and anarchism. Among these, his favorite was Mao and his Cultural Revolution. He was okay with killing millions to achieve his dream, just like Mao. His dream, of course, of going back to year zero, a pure communist and self-sufficient farming utopia, uncorrupted by those filthy and anti-revolutionary Western capitalist ideals. In order to achieve his Minecraft utopia, he first dismantled the existing government and replaced it with his own secretive one-party dictatorship, with its own secret military police. You know, standard dictatorship stuff. Then he started flattening out the country. Pol Pot hated 3 things: merchants, intellectuals, and technology. To him, all 3 represented corrupt colonialist ideals. Pol Pot was convinced that all 3 evils would join together to create one big evil: cities. So all cities were forcibly emptied out with up to 2 million people leaving their homes and jobs at gunpoint to farming communes. Here's how these communes looked like. We start with some nice, bombed, flattened land. If there are any trees or building ruins that may provide even the slightest bit of shade, they are all cut down. In the middle of all this nowhere, a small cluster of crude huts made with bamboo, leaves, and mud stand. These houses are typically 4 meters wide and 3 meters long, with 30 people packed in one hut, sleeping on the dirt floors. Everybody looks the same, hair shaved down, with the same black clothes and a small red scarf. Here's how a typical day would look like. 4 a.m., a loud gong or shouting would wake everyone and hundreds of people would pour out of the huts. The menu is the same 24/7. A tiny bowl of watery rice porridge, if you're lucky. After breakfast, you'd be assigned a random task, either one of the three: digging canals, planting rice, or building dams. Yeah, just a nice little 12-hour workday with no weekends, no equipment, and no electricity, just your bare hands and the nice, relaxing 40 degrees Celsius Cambodian sun. If you thought you could just rest after working, how anti-revolutionary of you. Everybody had to come together for mandatory struggle confession sessions, where you had to prove you were willing to Pol Pot's cause. These are some of your options: chanting slogans, denounce enemies, confess imaginary sins like stealing food or wanting to see your family. This went on for 3 to 4 hours. Around midnight, you could now sleep for around 4 hours till your day repeats again. Lovely, right? Too bad you really couldn't get any sleep. If the low nutrition, harsh conditions, and disease didn't kill you, the Khmer Rouge will. The rule of law basically didn't exist. If any crime were committed, or even suspected of doing so, it would mean certain death for you. If you answered poorly during confession sessions, it would mean certain death for you. Families were separated, with husbands and wives isolated, while children were sent to the child units to spy on adults. Of course, if these children reported on you, it would mean certain death for you. Normally, you would be marched to a mass gravesite nearby, called killing fields. Bullets were considered too expensive, and you would be executed with farming tools or a sharpened bamboo stick. Instead of building industries and institutions, the Khmer Rouge industrialized executions and torture. The most famous is Security Prison 21, or S21. The Khmer Rouge was so good at killing people, of the 20,000 in S21, only 12 people survived. An astonishing 0.06% survival rate. Most people brought here were either intellectuals or Khmer Rouge members disliked by Pol Pot. People were brutally tortured to extract confessions similar to fanfictions, like working as a KGB or CIA agent, when most Cambodians had never even heard of the USA or USSR. After confessing, death of course, the point of these confessions was to justify the regime's control over the country. It was lucky if you died alone. The Khmer Rouge often touted the phrase, "cut the grass by pulling out the roots," where they would track and kill your entire bloodline from newborn babies all the way to the elderly. Cambodia started off with 8 million people in 1975. In just 4 years, 1.7 to 2 million people, about a quarter of the population, died due to starvation, disease, and executions. By December 1978, Cambodia was a heaping mess, and Vietnam had had enough. Pol Pot's mess was seeping through the border, and they decided to intervene. In just 2 months, the Khmer Rouge regime collapsed, and Pol Pot ran away to China. However, the damage was irreversible. Not just the economy, but the very core of Cambodia was broken. First to go was the traditional family-based society of Cambodia. Before the regime, Cambodia was deeply family-centered like any other Asian country. But 5 years of separated families, fewer educated to teach or guide, community bonds were irreparable. A severe issue was orphans. It is estimated that there were around 500,000 orphans across Cambodia after the Khmer Rouge's collapse. Without any parental figures, most orphans ended up in the streets, where they resorted to crime or were forcibly drafted into the military to survive. Growing up after witnessing massacres, starvation, and abandonment left generations emotionally scarred, creating cycles of dysfunctional families with high rates of violence and mental illness. Next to go was the trust in the government and the rule of law. None of the Khmer Rouge leaders were really punished for their crimes. For one, Pol Pot ran away and never faced trial, living comfortably for years until he was put on house arrest, which didn't matter because he died a few months later in 1998. Other top leaders were tried decades later, the last ending in 2022. Most mid to lower level Khmer Rouge officials simply switched sides, still maintaining their power. The idea that leaders were corrupt mass murderers and that the law couldn't punish them created a widespread mistrust for state institutions and the law. Finally, Cambodia lost their sense of nationality. Without true reconciliation, the nation still struggles to build a strong sense of nationalism. It's the exception to an otherwise very nationalistic Asia. Also, the trauma and the cycle of dysfunctional families push generations apart. With history undertaught and older generations avoidant of issues, younger generations were left with trouble to connect to their own nation, resulting in very high rates of brain drain and other unresolved issues. Here's where everything goes tumbling down. Breakdown of families left the people without emotional, educational, and civic tools to rebuild a stable society. The vulnerable populace was then governed by the same bullies that caused their own suffering. With no accountability and no moral reckoning, the corrupt elites capitalized on the fractured and traumatized public to maintain dominance without resistance. The average citizen was too overwhelmed by just surviving day to day and had little space to imagine, let alone demand, justice or reform. As the population's trust in its institutions worsened and nationality went down the drain, a shared national project was kinda impossible. With no ownership in the government and no confidence in a better future, everybody focused more on short-term goals. This deep disengagement ensures that the cycle of exploitation continues. A disempowered public enables elite exploitation, while elites in turn perpetuate the conditions that keep the public disempowered. Sounds too bad to be true? Let me prove it to you. This is Hun Sen. He was a mid-level commander in the Khmer Rouge before defecting to Vietnam in 1977. This way, not only did he avoid accountability altogether, he was rewarded power instead. Later, Hun and his party, the CPP, then took over the country, stacking the military, courts, and economy with his loyalists, often family members. This formed into a patronage network which suppressed all forms of opposition, either by force or changing the law. Hun's government essentially became unreplaceable as all opposition was wiped out essentially. After gaining control over the country, the Hun Sen government was able to give state resources to loyalist business elites who then funded the ruling party. Key industries were dominated with legal favoritism and no regulation. Also, the government used corrupt methods to strike deals with shady Chinese investors and channeled money through the country for money laundering and other crimes. One of their main strategies is land grabbing. Here's how that works. This is a farmer. He's been farming here for almost 10 years. What he doesn't know is that the Khmer Rouge destroyed all property records, and his land's been classified as an economic land. In a few weeks, the government shows up with tools and bulldozers, and his farm and house are quickly turned into pancakes. He tries resisting, but is beaten and arrested. With no ways of earning aid, he quickly becomes debt-trapped and is forced to work in poor construction sites for the rest of his life. Corrupt methods like land grabbing is why, on paper, it seems the country is advancing. GDP is rising, industries are growing, and urban areas are expanding. But it's all very unequal. Corruption allows for public resources meant for the people to be concentrated on major companies and government officials. Then, the alienated people are used as cheap labor for those same companies. Corruption makes sure that it stays this way, discouraging real entrepreneurship, raising land prices, and keeping wages very low. It's no wonder that poverty is still a very big issue in Cambodia, with many also living near the poverty line. Also, shady investment deals attracted Chinese organized gangs to set up mass cyber scam and human trafficking operations within the country like Sihanouk, Pol Pot, and Bavet. It's not all bad though. Cambodia has undeniably improved in several areas. The national poverty rate dropped significantly from 33.8% to 17.8% in 10 years, lifting nearly 2 million people out of poverty before the pandemic. Access to basic services has improved. Around 90% of households now have access to electricity and water. Average wages, though still low, have steadily risen in the garment sector, which employs over 700,000 workers. While problems like embezzlement and low quality still exist, infrastructure has expanded dramatically. New roads, bridges, and rail connections have linked rural and urban areas, contributing to equality. After some nice nagging from ASEAN and the UN, Cambodia also increased crackdowns on crime syndicates, with authorities raiding illegal scam compounds. We'll have to see what happens to Cambodia in the future. Improvements are good, but they don't fix the real problem. Generational trauma still lingers on, and studies showing Cambodian youth exhibit significant levels of depression and mental struggles from unresolved family issues. Human rights issues concerning human trafficking and work conditions are still prevalent across the country. Political repression is going strong, with the opposition parties banned completely in 2023. Speaking of 2023, Hun Sen finally stepped down after almost 4 decades in power, to his son Hun Manet, who will also probably rule for another 4 to 5 decades or so. Let's hope this guy over here can make some real change for Cambodia. Good luck, Cambodia. You're going to need it. Love the food, by the way. It tastes really good.